Ha! Any blacksmiths around? Oh hey, I'm a wizard. I can fix your thing with magic. Sword. What? My sword. Whatever. Give it here. Give it here. Come on. Now, close your eyes while I magic the thingy fixed. Sword. Hey. No peeking. Whatever. Is it ready yet? Yeah. Yeah. All done. Hey, how'd you do that? Oh, just some magic. Why did you just wink? Oh, no reason. Magic. The ultimate tool in many of the worlds we create. With the right spells or helping the right spirits, gods, or monsters, you can change, enchant, or repair your environment and your gear however you want. In the real world, we have, as a population dwelling on this planet over millennia, developed technology through trial and error and passed down our knowledge to successive generations through oral traditions, writing, images, and other methods. In this way, we have slowly, haltingly, and sometimes with many steps back, progressed from throwing rocks at one another on the shivering tundras to leaving mean comments on social media from the comfort of our toilets. All of this progress has created special niches in society where a person could hone a set of skills and knowledge which could be passed down, from the rock and stick sharpeners of our ancestors to the doctors, scientists, engineers, carpenters, welders, blacksmiths, artisans, and other professions we have today. But in a world where you can snap your fingers and fix a broken bridge or heal a wound, unbend a broken axle, unrust your sword, or unrip your pants, is there a place for a carpenter or a tailor or an engineer? How do we fit these professions into the world when magic can solve everything? Well, some might say things have to be made to be fixed. Sure. But what lies in between the limits we put on these things forms the spaces for non-magical professions. Can you really get a job as a welder, a fabricator, a plumber, or a scientist in a truly magical world? Or do we have to change the way we look at these professions and find a new way to fit crafting into these settings? Let's talk about it. So I think we can all agree that no matter how much they do or don't improve safety and consistency, things like, say, building codes can be really annoying when you just want to nail some wood together in the forest and you're not worried about bits falling off when it's windy. Well, good news. Who needs a building code when you've got a spell book? Just magic that wood together. Magic the shingles onto the roof. Hey, why not just magic up a whole shack or a tower or a castle? Need a bridge over the river? Whisper to the stones to line up and cast a spell to keep them in place. Well, despite what some other bearded guys will tell you, it's not quite so easy to move big rocks around with magic. How does your dad, who builds his own furniture out of driftwood, or the town stone carver, keep up with the local wizard who can do it all? Well, here's where we have to put in some real world building. How about the idea that no matter how wizardly you are, the stones only obey a person they respect? You need someone who works with them to cut and shape them. Then the wizard can make them jump up and hold them in place. You don't need a stonemason as much as you need someone who can communicate with the land. You've just created a new profession that fits in the same niche. Maybe there are powerful guilds that protect the rights of your carpenters against magical usurpation. Or perhaps your carpenters also need to be trained by local druids to really get the most out of their training, speaking to the woods and infusing it with magical properties, or prompting it to grow and twist into new shapes and forms. You've just changed the way architecture works in your world. These aren't so much the types of professions that need to be made obsolete in a magical world. Rather, they're fairly easy to adapt to fit into a new setting without feeling out of place. Doing so opens new opportunities for roleplay and world building. Now, wood and stone are fairly easy to reinterpret in a magical way. The properties of metals also make them and their associated professions prime candidates for magical interference. For one thing, many metals are tied to magic in one way or another in our own legends and stories. Silver is tied to rituals involving the moon, while iron is antithetical to magic and magical beings. This variety lets us do things like use magic to increase one or another properties of a material in a way that would be impossible without magic. We could increase the hardness of a metal while also increasing its malleability or decreasing its brittleness. In metals, these properties maintain a delicate balance, but in a world where magic reigns, you could create amazing new items that defy the sciences. Blacksmiths who work with magical metals might need to have a deeper knowledge of magic in order to work in certain places, which means there will have to be specialists. Just having a single blacksmith shop in a city or town where everyone goes, or having all your blacksmiths sell or do the same things, start to feel like it doesn't really fit. Maybe we have welding earlier in the tech tree for your RPG. A wizard discovers that lightning can be harnessed and metals bonded quickly, and so develops spells that a special new profession can use to craft, mix, and create new items in your world. You could create magical spells and effects specifically using this system. Maybe a religious sect of metal bonders exists to make trouble for your heroes in a TTRPG setting. Fantasy metals are a convenient and interesting way to explain away anomalous effects or plot devices. Don't just say your hero's magic sword is made from superior doesn't breakanite and leave it at that. Delve deeper into your own lore and think about what it means for your world. Some games, I'm talking specifically about Arcanum, make it a point to talk about how magic and technology don't mix well. One has to be careful while balancing the use of one with the other. For example, a sword's a fairly simple object. Applying enchantments or subjecting such an item to magical effects would not significantly inhibit its ability to function, but as you start to increase the complexity of forces and effects in a given system, as with things that use levers, gears, electricity, etc., the magic has more effect because there are more forces for it to interfere with, and therefore complex mechanical systems tend to break down in the presence of magic because friction stops working correctly or gravity is altered in one part and not in another. Your engineers may need magical training, or maybe they have to work with a spellcaster who can make sure there's no magical interference. You could use this to create new and interesting lab or shop settings full of magical devices for checking and measuring these differences. Maybe there's an order of semi-magical knights or wizards who are like the OSHA inspectors of your world. They come in to inspect for magical interference. Maybe they cause some problems for your hero. Maybe your hero was once a member of their order and left because they hated paperwork. This can give a world a very logical method of dealing with technology and magic in a way that fits the setting and creates space for artisans and professionals to still exist, albeit with a bit of a learning curve and maybe an obstacle or two to work around. Let's talk about food. You want to open a little restaurant in the small town where the adventurers come through to find jobs, but every party has a wizard who can magic up some special berries that keep everyone from getting hungry. Maybe the local retailer of camp supplies sells a magic tent that pops up with a full kitchen. What's a highly trained chef to do? How does one pay off one's debt to chef school in a world like that? Well, it's a universal truth that no matter how much we love to be rugged individuals, everyone has days when they're too tired from fighting dragons and drop-kicking goblins to want to do their own cooking, even if you can magic up something edible. This is a good place to talk about the limitations of magic, which we will discuss in greater detail in a little bit. For one thing, I assume that the skill of the mage comes into play. I'm sure that a highly trained level 20 wizard could magic up the best cake you've ever tasted, but the village hedge wizard probably can't do much more than a handful of magic beans that taste like pennies or something. Probably better to keep a bag of holding filled with trail mix handy, unless you want to take frequent rest stops on the way to the ancient ruins. Another thing that I think most of us share is that we all really want to go out and have someone else do all the cooking. Experience the local food and atmosphere. So what do the local taverns and establishments do differently to get people in the door? Maybe the place is run by a dragon who uses fire breath to cook food to perfection. Maybe the chef knows a mage who gets him the best ingredients with strange effects. Maybe the drinks are laced with a potion that lets you hear and understand multiple languages. Maybe the cupcakes at the bakery can scream. Who knows what delights and what horrors cooking in a magical world might open up to you. Furthermore, maybe the local mage guild owns its own restaurants where only the most highly trained mages are employed to make food from magic. That sounds like a cool way to create a conflict for your characters to get involved in. A rivalry between the mages guild and the chef school could get pretty interesting. That reminds me, what about artists using magic to make the experience of viewing their work more interesting? Paintings that talk, sculptures that move, books that get sad when you close them. How has magic influenced your culture, your art, your fashion? Can someone just be an artist, or do they have to use magic to keep people interested? Can a painter just be a painter? I think there's an inherent magic in the practice of making art. In a world where magic can be anywhere, this could mean that your painters and artists are themselves practicing magic just by virtue of making their work. By creating things, you're breathing life into them, and in a living world full of weird effects, maybe art could be another school of wizardry or category of magic altogether. Another way of keeping these professions useful is having an artisan that creates unique items. What if there were an entire industry devoted to using magic to make clothes that mimic living creatures, like scarves that move like dragons and are self-heating, jackets that are made from the hides of a magical creature that can expand and contract in a way that makes it a good fit for any weather condition? Do artists employ local mages to create magical effects in their work? Are there mages who specialize in working with artists to make living paintings and sculptures? Is there a group of artists who use magic to create works of art that come to life and haunt museums? World building is about more than just figuring out what your continents look like and how their politics and religions work. In fact, it can be pretty boring if that's the basis for your whole story. When your readers are seeing things through your character's eyes, or your players are experiencing the world, they don't really need a political treatise on the nature of the last 1,000 years of war between kingdoms. They want to know what the meat vendor on the street is selling, why he won't tell you what it's made of, and where they can get a pair of cat ears that let them hear through walls. That's what really gets people to feel like they're inside your world. Alright, let's talk about heroes for a second. We all know where most heroes come from. They tend to start off as humble farmers forced to change their fate and take up a sword to go adventuring, going on their hero's journey and being the chosen one. Something like that, right? I mean, it's probably a good thing they did, because a small farm in a quiet village sounds like it probably wouldn't put much gold in your pocket when the new Magic Mart opens up and sells enchanted pickles for half the price your dad charges at the local market. Well, I think we can talk about living organisms in a magical world and how the unpredictability of biology might make magical manipulation more difficult. It's easy to levitate a rock. They don't protest too much, but imagine you levitate a chicken. It gets spooked, and now you can't get it down. Maybe your magician up the road starts a magical farm, but he's never slaughtered a chicken or milked a cow, so he just uses magic. But the constant exposure to magic causes all kinds of mutations. The cows are giving birth to monsters, the pumpkin vines are taking over the local countryside, and the half-priced pickles are sentient, angry, and it's really annoying because you can't buy the regular kind anymore and you don't like the way they swear at you when you eat them. That mage really needs someone who understands local wildlife and plants. You might have to be sure the local farmers take classes from a sect of druids living in the forest. Maybe they have to work with mages to farm more produce and keep magical mutations in check. I think instead of resorting to talking about farmers as a trope, make your local people more in tune with the land. A whole new profession might be needed to manage agriculture in a high magic zone. Another way to implement agriculture as part of a setting with lots of magic is to use magic to help with labor while the actual farmers get about knowing what to plant and when and how. Maybe your village wizard goes around animating the stones into creatures that pick the crops every year. They last for a season and then he has to come back and do it again. This creates a nice little cycle of industry that gives you reason to include farming in your story rather than just using it as a boring background for a main character. There are, of course, lots of materials that we need to get in order to make things. We've spoken about magical metals, using magic to make rocks move, and new ways to shape wood, but what about the ways in which we get some of these resources? A bunch of workers with pickaxes might have trouble finding work when there's a mage who can make the stones walk out of the earth on their own, for instance. Plot hooks often begin with disputes between mining factions and blacksmiths who use their metals and gems to make cursed blades that make your hands fall off or something. I think there could be constraints on magical extraction that come not from technical limitations, but cultural ones. Maybe the mines are owned by people who don't want to let wizards in to poke around and ruin their business. It could also be that the magical metals and gems have a property that causes them to resist magical interference. You could create a new way for mages to fit into the setting by enchanting mining tools to work more effectively. The mining company can't run without a supply of magical tools. It could also be a good way to introduce some entirely new professions, such as specially trained mages that can feel the stones and minerals in the earth. They accompany mining parties to help them find what they're looking for, to use their magic to coax the dirt to more easily give up its riches. Magical mining tools can also be broadly interpreted. Sure, a pickaxe can be made to break less frequently, but what about a magical candle that glows a different color when you get close to a pocket of underground gas? A small vial of dragon's fire that can evaporate water in a tunnel. Maybe you want to cut down a huge tree and instead of having it fall and flatten nearby homes, you have a mage that levitates logs. A lumber mage. Why not? The topic of resource trade and extraction is often used as a major plot point and opens up a niche for brand new arcana and technology. A trade war between companies or business interests can be boring, but not when one of them employs dragons, for example. The only limit is your imagination. But seriously, you'll want to come up with some limits because you could break the whole world otherwise. Let's talk about putting limits on our magic. So, your farmers can grow giant plants. Your miners have trained dragons to melt metal right out of the rocks. Your chefs create amazing magical pastries that let you punch through walls, and you, the writer, have written yourself into a corner you can't get out of. Who needs conflict when you can just magic your way out of any situation, or you have the perfect reproduction of your MacGuffin so no one needs to go looking for it? You don't really have a story anymore. Now, you could just ignore all that stuff and pretend it only happened when it needed to and never bring it up again. Congratulations, your world doesn't make sense, and all your characters look really dumb. Why wouldn't a character who needs an item just buy a magical one from a mage or pay to have one magicked up? Well, maybe that's because it wouldn't work that way. Maybe the magic item only keeps working in the presence of a person that emits a highly potent magical field. Once the mage hands it over and the character walks away, it just falls to pieces or explodes. That amazing bowl that always fills with food? Yeah, as soon as the wizard goes away, it turns into a foul-smelling ooze. Magical fields can have a negative effect on your technology, but they're essential for the function of your magical items and effects. That's why mages are in high demand. They can't just hand out wands of fireball and save the army a whole lot of stabbing. When an item is made with magic, it doesn't use easily predictable forces like gravity and friction. If you don't know what's going on inside there, you lose complete control of the forces that make it tick. The magic bubbles up and turns you into nothing more than a steaming mound of sand and a pair of boots. Or the effect grows so catastrophically large that it becomes a danger to everyone in the room. A magic user could keep those forces under control just like an engineer or technician can fix a valve or prevent something from overheating, but without an understanding of what you have in your hand, you can't hope to keep things in check if it doesn't work properly. On the matter of using magic to gather and create new objects, let's talk about what magic does. In the context of a fantasy or fictional setting, we usually think of magic as a way to shape the raw stuff of the universe into something we need, thus bypassing the requirement of mining or logging, but that material still has to come from somewhere, right? When you cut down a tree with an axe, you usually pick the tree. You don't blindfold yourself and stumble into the forest and start swinging. Hopefully. When you use magic, you can't always be so precise. Maybe the wooden item you just magicked up siphoned material from a local building which just collapsed. You can do it in a pinch, but who knows what chaos you might cause if you're not properly trained. Say that your local mage is not just a mage, maybe they're a warlock, and their magic comes from a pact with a god, entity, or spirit. Now, maybe they're a real chill, extraplanar being, or maybe they have lots of tentacles and get really mad. When you use your magic to create something, that magic's filtered and shaped through that entity. They can only make things that fit their domain. They can't make things that are more powerful than they are. Everything they make might be infected with part of their spirit. Maybe your new magic boots have emotions and really hate your feet, or like them a little too much. I'm not really sure which would be worse. So, you roll into town with your new glowy armor and your really weird boots, and you start looking for quests. You stroll past the local temple, and suddenly you're being shouted at. The guards grab you, and suddenly you're about to be burned at the stake. Is it the weird boots? Turns out you've entered a place where the local religious sect has outlawed the creation of magical items. They have an interest in keeping power to themselves, or they just really hate anyone but the gods using magic. And yeah, probably the boots didn't help. Limits can be technical or cultural, religious or scientific. They can play an important role in the plot of a story, or they can be there in the background to stop your characters from being too overpowered or looking really dumb for forgetting that a thing existed when it was no longer convenient for the plot. These limitations can be overt and obvious, or they can be written into the very fabric of a craft system. Maybe the act of crafting itself is what gives us magic, and we can only alter it subtly. Maybe it came into being when the first sentient people started making simple stone tools, so hey, let's go back in time for a minute. So, the first beings felt great hunger. In that hunger came a need to kill. The first creature to pick up a stone and make it sharp, haft it, and throw it to bring down prey also made the first magic. With the napping and the cutting and the shaping, the creature fed his hunger and his need into the stone and the wood. With the chase, he fed it the thrill of the hunt, and so the first spear was a magical thing imbued with purpose and given form. Maybe this is how magic was first put into tools by thinking beings in your world. The ability to make something is its own sort of magic. This is sometimes all the story needs. You don't have to shoot fireballs from your sword or weave fabric out of the moonlight for there to be magic in your craft system. The stronger the feelings a character is able to articulate, the more precisely they're able to imbue the object they're creating with purpose. This is the basis for a different form of magic. Not so flashy, but it's fairly poetic and gets around the need to worry about whether it breaks the narrative. The object itself has a sort of sentience, because of the magic that was poured into it. Think Sauron in the One Ring here. It doesn't have to be anger, though. It could be great need or a happy memory imbued in the object. It could be desire for haste, or like with those boots, lust, or something. Whatever. It gives you a moment where the impossible becomes possible. A character throws the spear that has no chance of striking its target, but because of his hope, it kills the bad guy anyway. The only magic it possessed was that it was made by someone who was full of overwhelming fear or great need. A magic system built on this kind of foundation can also be made to only function if the item is subjected to a ritual conducted by a specially trained wizard. Maybe they can sense the object's purpose or use their powers to make it manifest when needed. Maybe the hero has a kind of latent magic that lets them sense the power that went into other objects when they were created, and can view their past or use them without having to be trained. This sort of subtle magic can be used to circumvent the need to put strict limits on things, but it can still be a pain if used in a cumbersome way. When you create a high magic setting, there are so many ways we can combine crafting and magic to make something that fits the world we want to make and feels right. Whether you're writing a story or building a world to set a TTRPG campaign in, balancing the ability to use magic with the need to have non-magic users in the world is important. It involves looking at how both can work with one another, against one another, or separate from one another. The goal is to make sure that they don't work against the fabric of your world or your story. We want a way to make items crafted by non-magic users still have value, to still have a place in the world. I can't speak to every story, but I think it's important to make sure that if magic and non-magic both exist, they each carry weight in the story and make sense to the reader, player, or viewer. We can use the dichotomy of magic and non-magic to tell better stories, to add new elements to our stories, and to make our world feel more alive. It might be useful to design the world with this in mind. Are there places where magic doesn't function? Is trade an option to get magic items into that area? How does this affect what items are available to your characters? Maybe this allows non-magical or traditional professions to be more significant. Maybe they're given higher honor in this part of the world. Or maybe they're mercilessly exploited. If you decide to place limits instead on the magic itself, how does this affect your story? What can your characters do and what can't they do if, say, Magically created objects only work near magical fields or in the hands of mages who can control them. How does that change their decisions and alter the story? So, however we choose to fit magic, science, and manual labor into our worlds, I think it's safe to assume we can't just write them in as if one doesn't change the other fundamentally. Well, that's the video. I hope this has given you some ideas for new stories or campaigns in your franchise of choice. If you liked the video, please hit like. If you want to see more, please hit subscribe. It really does help, and listen, I appreciate all of you. If you disagree or think I missed anything, please hit up the comments below and let me know. Till next time, don't let dubious people in robes near your precious technology. Call a professional. Bye, Internet.